Arts. I'm currently in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I work for the Indiana Attorney General's Office as Special Counsel of Complex Litigation.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Wong. I am a retired attorney and former judge. I'm also on the National Board of Directors for the Center for Civic Education. I live in Boise, Idaho, and I'm happy to be here to see you and to see you.
Good afternoon. My name is Myron Yoder. I'm the chairman of the Professional Standards and Practices Commission for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and a 37-year educator teaching We the People in the Allentown School District before I retired. So you guys are?
Hi, my name is Samantha, and we are Unit 6. We study the modern day applications of the Constitution.
Hello, I'm William.
Hi, I'm Addison.
Hi, I'm Avery.
Hi, I'm Natalie.
Hello, I'm Hayden, and we'd like to thank our coach and judge for being here today.
All right, so we have selected question number 1. I will read it and give you time for your opening statement. In 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Never in the history of this nation have so many people been arrested for the cause of freedom and human dignity. What lessons can be learned from the Children's March in Birmingham, Alabama? What is civic engagement, and what is its significance in American history? What responsibilities, if any, do schools have to promote civic education?" Or civic engagement, excuse me. You may begin.
The first lesson of the Children's March is of the impact of mass civil disobedience. Over 1,000 young people were arrested in the march, with 2,500 arrested in total. This filled up the jails, putting pressure on the city of Birmingham to end segregation.
The Children's March also juxtaposed youth with violence. The cruel use of dogs and hoses against children magnified the visible transgressions by police, and therefore segregation. However, some figures, such as Malcolm X and Attorney General Robert Kennedy, criticized use of children in the protest.
If the events were not broadcasted nationally, the general attitude would not have changed. Because Southern Democrats had prevented the passage of civil rights legislation, political pressure was necessary to force action. Front-page stories featured photos of the cruelty, shifting national support to the protesters and villainizing Bull Connor.
As a result, pressure for change came from all sides of the aisle. President Kennedy denounced the ongoing violence. The federal government intervened in the negotiations, and multiple senators soon encouraged the passage of civil rights bills. This is another lesson from Birmingham: the power of public opinion to force government action.
The Children's March is a prime example of civic engagement. More broadly, civic engagement means being active in one's community, both politically and non-politically. Community service, voluntary associations, voting, and protests arising from social movements have all been forms of civic engagement in the U.S.
Civic engagement, specifically civil disobedience, is partially responsible for the existence of our democracy. Leading up to the Revolutionary War, people banded together to boycott British imports and formed the Continental Congress in response to the Intolerable Acts, building momentum and ultimately fighting for independence.
Some civic engagement involves a struggle for rights. The Silent Sentinels of the women's movement picketed the White House, leading to the 19th Amendment. Legal activism by the NAACP led to Supreme Court decisions in Gwynne v. U.S. and Brown v. Board, which prompted desegregation.
Conservative civic engagement often focuses on protecting individual freedom by limiting government action. For example, gun right advocates have challenged gun control legislation. This led to the case D.C. v. Heller, in which the Supreme Court found an individual's right to own guns under the Second Amendment.
Another form of civic engagement is volunteering. During the Civil War, ladies' aid societies made bandages, shirts, and tents for soldiers. And Volunteers of America provided relief during the Great Depression through employment bureaus, soup kitchens, and penny pantries, improving the quality of life for millions of Americans.
However, civic engagement does not always have a positive impact. For example, associations such as the Patriot Prayer target minorities to remove their political rights.
Public schools do have a responsibility to promote positive civic engagement, as they're funded by the taxpayer and therefore have a duty to the common good.
In School District v. Rodriguez, the Supreme Court held that all American students should be provided the basic level of education that they need to become capable voters. To promote voting, we should expand civic education to include hands-on learning, such as having students be able to propose bills to state legislatures.
In order to promote lifelong volunteering, schools should encourage community service. Multiple studies concluded that volunteering in high school increases the chances of volunteering later in life. Studies have also found that volunteering is linked to an increase in voter turnout and other forms of civic engagement.
Schools should also promote activism. During the 2019 climate strike, our school granted excused absences, drastically increasing student turnout and fueling classroom discussions. This shows how schools can encourage real-world participation. Thank you. Ready for your questions.
So thank you for that. I guess one of the things that we've been addressing is the idea of common good, how common good applies to this topic in this area, and whether common good is the same from state to state, or whether it varies from state to state or country to country. Can you speak to that?
I would say that the common good varies among different countries. Specifically, America is a very heterogeneous community. We have one of the largest the largest biodiversity of a lot of countries compared to, say, Japan, which has less diversity and is a more homogeneous country, and thus would have a more defined common good.
I would argue that the common good is more related to the greatest good for the greatest number of people. That is taking the equivalent of an average of the amount of happiness and the amount of access to basic human rights within a country, a state, or really any location. And that is what defines the common good.
I would disagree. I think that that form of determining the common good can lead to, as Madison defines in Federalist 10, as tyranny of the majority, and can ultimately oppress those in the minority. I would argue that from that calculation and Madison's idea of a system of government with checks and balances and a deliberative body, I would say the common good is people compromising and deliberating issues.
I would suggest that the governors who have issued the stay-at-home orders are believing that they're acting in the common good. My question to you is, are the protesters against these stay-at-home orders acting in an appropriate or inappropriate civic engagement? Be specific.
Going back to what my colleague Sam said, in my opinion, the common good is what is going to be the best for the greatest number of people. And the greatest number of people are going to benefit from a stay-at-home order because it keeps the country majority healthy. And while there may be some business owners or workers that need the money that they're going to lose, in reality, the greatest number of people are going to benefit from a stay-at-home order.
I disagree. I would argue that if we look at the Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness are three things that our nation was essentially formed to protect. But now we can see that these stay-at-home orders are not only violating economic liberty, which is, economic freedom, which is from small business owners, but also our life and ability to go outside and really just peacefully assemble and do other daily life things.
I would argue that although the stay-at-home orders can be a burden on some small business owners, an even bigger burden is losing a family member or losing your own life to the coronavirus. There have been stimulus packages put in place in order to help alleviate the financial burden on small businesses, but you can't exactly put a stimulus package that gives people back their health and their lives.
Additionally, to the second part of your question, I would say that it's not an appropriate form of civic engagement, as we can see from recent reports from the New York Times that actually many of the people fueling these protests are wealthy members of the Senate and Congress, or even the Betsy DeVos family, that are using this as a political way to take down Democratic leadership. So I would argue that it's not an appropriate form of civic engagement because it's people in power abusing those who don't understand what's going on.
I found it interesting that you talked about the nonviolence and the use of civil disobedience by the youth, but you also went back to the Declaration of Independence and you talked about the revolution, which is civil disobedience taken to a violent level to overthrow government, and you had good justification for that. So my question to you is, and indirectly you also mentioned the Civil War. Is there anything in your mind that you would say to yourself, look, I believe this strongly in it, that I believe as a society, if this were to happen, I would be willing to rise up and use violence as a means to change government. Is there anything there?
For me, I think that if we still can't get climate justice and we're on the verge of our entire world and our population going extinct due to the climate injustice, I would become violent.
For me personally, I think that having access to reproductive health care is essential and fundamental, especially in the women's rights movement, and that increasingly states have been pushing more and more restrictive abortion laws, and that if we overturn Roe v. Wade, that would be a moment for me that I think I would feel obliged to have a more dramatic response.
Violence?
I think that there are degrees of violence, and we've discussed this, that I don't think that physical violence is necessarily okay, but I think that when it comes to destruction of property or things that are illegal but considered violent, that those are means that are acceptable within civil disobedience, but physical violence onto another person isn't.
So the COVID-19 protests that you're seeing going on right now, where people are holding AK-47s and all that, do you see that as a threat by that group, saying, if this isn't accomplished, we're willing to get violent? Or do you just see them as saying, I want to protect my rights and this is the Second Amendment? How's that being read by you?
I think that there is a degree to which you can protect your rights and that you should feel obligated. May I finish my thought?
Yeah, you can.
Protect your rights, but in this particular scenario, what is going to be more protective is staying at home, and it's how you're going to protect the rights of other people, not just your own personal individual rights.
Good.
So we'll have a few minutes for feedback. I thought that you all did a fantastic job. I particularly appreciated your use of incorporating volunteerism into the aspect, and also explaining to us that, you know, engagement can not always be positive, that there's a negative side to some of it as well. And that's a spin that we quite haven't heard a lot. So I appreciate that. And it's always good to hear disagreements. These are not easy questions, and there aren't any easy answers. So thank you for being here today and for your thoughtful presentation.
I enjoyed your presentation. I both love this program and I hate this program. I love this program to the extent that I get to hear from the youth of our country and the constitutional scholars that you are. I hate this program to the fact that we can't go on for hours and hours and hours, because I really do want to hear more from you, especially about the protesters carrying guns. I live in Idaho, and I think more than 50% of the protesters at our state capitol were carrying guns, and it causes me some concern, and it's a very delicate issue. So anyway, I wish we had more time to have you expound on that. I thought your answers to our cross-examination questions were thoughtful. I might have liked a little more specificity, but they still were good answers. Thank you.
I too want to mirror. I had a wonderful conversation with you. Thank you very much. In particular, you got me past what normally was my first question, and that is, what would, in your mind, would you be willing to protest, to what would you be willing to protest and use violence as a part, because you introduced the whole Declaration of Independence revolution, and that opens the door for that. Is there something that you believe that caused to be so strong? Wish I could add a little bit more time on the COVID-19 and the protesters, because one has to ask yourself, they're standing there with guns. Are they staying there with guns just saying, I have a right to carry, and I'm proving that right, which is now a right I'm arguing to be able to be opened up in society? Or are they basically sending a message saying, we're Minutemen, and if we don't get what we want, we're willing to turn to violence? So is it a threat, or is it, what are they saying? And that concerns me as a member of our society. And I would have liked to have seen that pursue a little bit further. I agree with Dane on that. Wonderful
Overall,
job.
good job.
To the parents who are hiding behind your computers or listening through the door with stethoscopes, and to your teacher, I just want to say thank you for supporting your students in that, particularly this year. You did a good job. Stay safe.
Great job, Lincoln High School.